Well, actually, I was thinking about it this morning. Time's flying by on us. This is week 13 of school, and so we've just got about 5 weeks left here until we've completed this semester. So that's a good thing, but it also means we got some work to do, And of course, we find ourselves here in Introduction to Missions, looking in the book Eternity in Their Hearts. And that's what we'll be doing for the next 2 or 3 weeks at least. And just want you to be thinking about the fact that once we get through our discussion from this book, there'll be another quiz. And so just be getting ready for that. It'll predominantly be, over the material in this book. And of course, it will have that one huge question on it. Did you read it or not? So again, just want to continually encourage you to try to get that done if you haven't already accomplished that, or if you don't feel like you're on track to accomplish it. I really want to encourage you to get with that. Well, let's have a word of prayer and then we'll get started. Father, I just want to thank you so much for all that you do for us, Lord. Your blessings are so astounding. Sin has brought a lot of things into our life. It's brought death. It's brought sickness, it's brought sorrow, it's brought turmoil. All these things are very real, they're part of the curse. And yet your grace is able to abound over all of these. And if we will just place our confidence in you and stay steadfast in you, even when our minds can't wrap around how something's going to work out, you can make it happen. And Lord, we just always want to be people that have that great confidence in you. And as we think about missions and all the different facets of it, Lord, it's so important that we grasp it and that we are passionate about it. Because although we must be very diligent right in our own personal location, wherever you've placed us to be a witness, we've also got to be a part of seeing that message go around the world. And missions is the way that gets done. And Lord, as we look at this teaching from Eternity in Their Hearts, help us to realize that that's a very real thing. That there are people all around this world that you've placed eternity in their hearts. And Lord, even many of them have been drawn to you through general revelation. They know you exist, although there's so much they don't know about you. And they just need someone to come with the Bible, someone to come with that special revelation that will fill in the gaps that they're missing. And Father, as we learn about this, it's exciting to hear the stories about the way you've done things in the past. But Lord, these stories are still being written in the future. There's still more ground to cover, more new lands to forge, and more people to hear your gospel. And we just pray that we would be a part of it any way we possibly can. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, last time we talked a little bit about the Incas. And we talked about, how that they came so close. Pachacuti came so close. They really got the idea through general revelation that the gods they were serving weren't the right gods, and there was something bigger than that, but he came short, and he did not allow himself to go all the way. There were personal concerns. It makes me think about the Pharisees and Jesus being right there, in their day and time. And really, it was pretty obvious. Those guys, they should have not had a hard time figuring that out at all. But when you read the scriptures carefully, you discover that it wasn't just a matter of disbelief because of, they just couldn't grasp. It just didn't make sense to them. It was also personal issues where they had something to lose if they embraced Jesus, they thought. They would lose their power, they would lose their position. And so they started holding on to some personal things. Well, Pachacuti actually did that too. He had some things to lose if he went all the way with this thing. And so he pulled up short and did not do that. Now, what we're actually talking about here is what the author here calls people of a vague God. And that is that some way, somehow they've come to the conclusion there is a God. You know, there's someone that created all things, and there's someone that sustains all things. They just don't know who it is. Or even if they have a name for this God, they don't know how they can be at peace with Him. They don't know how they can be connected with Him. And so that's the kind of things that we're talking about here. Now in Central Africa, he mentions the Mbaka people, and Koro is the name that they had given to this one true God. The Creator, as designated in several Banta languages of Africa, and one Banta tribe, the Mbaka, came closer perhaps than any other people on earth to anticipating not merely the arrival of the message from Koro, but even part of its actual content. Missionary Eugene Rosenau, PhD, used to listen spellbound whenever Mbaka tribesmen, especially from the Yablanga village, explained why they responded to the gospel with such immediacy when Eugene's father, Ferdinand Rosanna, and his Baptist colleagues preached among the Mbaka in the early 1920s. Koro already sent his son to accomplish something wonderful for all mankind. Forefathers turned from the truth and forgot what he had accomplished for mankind. So in other words, this was part of their legend, that they believed in Koro, the one true God, and they believed he'd sent his son to accomplish something wonderful for mankind, but their forefathers had turned away from Koro. And because they turned away from him, then it had been forgotten what this Koro's son had accomplished. You know, so nobody knew. I mean, they knew he'd accomplished something wonderful. They knew that Koro was the one true God, but because our ancestors have abandoned him, nobody even knows what Koro's son accomplished for us. And so this is, you know, they're just living on year after year after year with this teaching in their heart and mind, but they just live in the hopelessness of it because nobody can know. Nobody can remember what was accomplished. So since the time of the forgetting, that's exactly what they called it in their language, the forgetting. Since the time of the forgetting, successive generations of our people have longed to discover the truth about Koro's son. Messengers would eventually come and restore that forgotten knowledge to us. Somehow we knew also that the messengers would probably be white-skinned. Not unusual at all to hear that story in several foreign countries, several third world countries, that people believe that white-skinned people would come to them and tell them the truth. We resolved that whenever Koro's messengers arrived, we would welcome them and believe their message. Even the tribal rite of passage among the Mbaka, Eugene says, shows Judeo-Christian parallels. First, the elders offered a blood sacrifice for the initiate. Then they baptized the initiate by immersion in a river. For several days following his baptism, the initiate must behave like a newborn child. In keeping with the imagery, he is not permitted to talk. For these reasons, I propose that these particular facets of the Mbaka lore be described as redemptive. He says here as a note, redemptive, but not redeeming. Okay, they have redemptive quality. All the pictures have redemptive quality, but just those images alone could not redeem them, just like the Old Testament sacrifices alone and the images they pictured could not redeem God's people. Redeeming would mean that Mbaka people could find a relationship with God through their own lore apart from the gospel. Redemptive in this context means contributing to the redemption of the people, but not culminating it. Well, can you imagine being the missionary that discovers those people that has all of that in their lore and has all of that preset thinking, how, well, really just how easy it would be to take what they already held to be truth, what they already had through general revelation and through oral tradition being passed down, and to take God's special revelation and bring them on across. And so, again, the point is that, these are past events. These are things that took place. But these missionaries, when they went there, they didn't know that. It wasn't like somebody said, oh yeah, there's these people over here, and they are so close. If you'll just go talk to them, they are so close. They didn't know that. They just went at the leading of God, where they believed God would have them to go. And as it turned out, there was the blessing of having people in that situation. He talks a little bit about the Chinese and the Koreans as well. He said the Chinese call him, that's talking about the one true God, they call him Shang-Tai, meaning the Lord of Heaven. In Korea, he is known as Hananam, the Great One. Belief in Shang-Tai and Hanam predates Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism by an unknown number of centuries. So even today, the Chinese and the Koreans, they would acknowledge, well, yeah, this idea went back way back before these other religions that we embrace. The first reference in Chinese history to any kind of religious belief specifies Shang-Tai alone as the object of that belief, an estimated 2,600 years before Christ. So that's ancient, way, way back, 2,600 years before Christ. These Asian people were talking about Shang-Tai. And so it goes way back before Buddhism and those other things. Buddhism became what he calls the Sodom factor. Remember how I talked about the Sodom factor? Buddhism became the Sodom factor, which almost totally distracted the majority of Chinese and sometime later the majority of Koreans from Shang-Tai and Hanam. So, they had the opportunity, they had within general revelation and within oral tradition the opportunity to know that there's one true God. But when Buddhism came along as a alternative, that's what they pulled to. The Sodom factor is what they pulled to. Emissaries bearing Shang-Tai and Hanam's special revelation and Judeo-Christian testimony arrive. So here come the missionaries to tell them about God. But instead of calling their listeners to kneel in repentance before Shang-Tai and Hananium, the God reverenced by their founding fathers and both nations before the dawn of written history, the messengers sometimes deliberately imposed a completely foreign name for the Almighty. So here's what happened. Different from in these other cases that we read, where in their history, in their legend, in their oral tradition, they had a one true God. And when the missionaries said, well, tell me about this God, it was an exact description of our God that we worship. Then they just said, okay, yes, you're right. That's God, and let me tell you about Him. In this case, the missionaries decided, no, we won't allow their description of God. We won't allow their name for God. Now, it wasn't that they were talking about some other God. Again, it's not the difference between God and Allah. It's not like that. They are talking about one God, creator of heaven and earth. But they would not allow that. They said, no, we're going to call Him this. Something completely foreign to them. Protestant missionaries, when finally they reached China, disagreed vehemently among themselves as to whether or not they should use Shang-Tai. So some others came along and said, no, we should just, this is what they know as the one true God, we should just use that name instead of trying to create another name. When Protestant missionaries entered Korea in 1884, they found themselves virtually unanimous. Records indicated that Protestants genuinely believed, after investigating Korean understanding of the supernatural world, that Yahweh could have only one name in Korea, Hananiah. And so when they went into Korea, they decided, no, when they describe Hananiah, that's God. That's actually who they're talking about. That's the name we should use. Preaching like houses of fire in cities, towns, and villages, or in the countryside, Protestant missionaries began by affirming Korean belief in Hananiah. Now, by the way, I'm just reading what he says. You understand that when he uses the term Protestant, he means anything but a Catholic. Okay? Now, we wouldn't use the term Protestant that way, but that's what he intends by what he's saying here. Echoing the Apostle Paul's proclamation at Lystra, in the past, Theos, let all peoples, including Koreans, go their own way, choosing shamanism, Confucianism, Buddhism in reference to him, yet he did not leave himself without a witness. And so here they are, showing up to witness to the Koreans. Koreans by the thousands listened with awe. Today, approximately 3 million Koreans belong to, again, the Protestant Church. But what he means is anything that's not Catholic. So Baptist or anything else that's not Catholic, although we certainly would not call ourselves Protestants. Well, the point here is the difference in the two approaches. When they went into China, there was just this basic refusal on the part of the missionaries to use Shanghai, the name that they were familiar with, that they had always held in this idea of the possibility of one true God. Whereas in Korea, they used Hananam and let that be the name that was used. Well, the results are very, very different. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of believers in Korea now, and there's lots of believers in China, but there's a huge difference between what you see in those two places, even in our current view of it today. Then he goes on, and I think this is very, very interesting because I've even experienced this personally myself. And he starts talking about the people of the lost book. The people of the lost book. And he talks about the Karen people of Burma. You remember my story about being in Thailand and preaching in that village? Those were Karen people. And they weren't in Burma, which even Burma is not the name of the country anymore. It's Myanmar is the name of the country. But they were just south of Myanmar in Thailand. So we were right up in northern Thailand, close to the Burmese or the Myanmar border. And of course, a lot of these people were affected by Adoniram Judson, is the guy that did a lot of the mission work there. It talks about the fact that these tribesmen think that you may be a certain white brother whom they as people have been expecting from time immortal. How curious, replied the diplomat. So this is just a government representative that goes in. It's not a religious guy. It's just a government representative that goes in. And when he goes in for this visitor, his guide says, hey, they think you might be the white brother. They were expecting a white-skinned person to come and tell them the message. The diplomat, he just says, well, that's interesting. That's curious. He asks, what is the white brother? What's he supposed to do when he arrives? He's supposed to bring them a book, the guide said. A book just like the one their forefathers lost long ago. They're asking with bated breath, hasn't he brought it? Hasn't he brought it? And so again, people everywhere with this concept, that there used to be a book that had the truth in it, but it got lost. And somebody's going to bring them the book that's going to give them all the answers they need. Who is the author? The diplomat said. They say the author is Yahweh, the supreme God. Yahweh, the supreme God. Tell them they're mistaken, the diplomat says. I have no acquaintance with this God, Yahweh, nor do I have the slightest idea who their white brother could be. Well, if you and I had been flies on the walls, that would have been a sad moment, wouldn't it? Not only because of the lost condition of the people that were asking if he had the book, but his own lost condition and his terrible but true statement that he has no idea who Yahweh is. Hundreds of Karen, paled with disappointment, watched him leave. Could our forefathers have been mistaken? Asked the young Karen. Don't worry, responded an elder, managing a hopeful smile. One day he will come. One day he will come. Then it talks about in 1816 there was a Muslim traveler that came through. Not very light-skinned, but he did have in his possession a book. Men called Bukos, a special kind of teacher, representing not demons, but Yahweh, the true God. Yes, the Karen actually esteemed them as prophets of the true God and kept reminding the Karen, one day we must return fully to the ways of Yahweh. Karen prophets actually taught their people hymns passed down from generation to generation by verbal communication alone. Karen hymns to Yahweh reveal how astonishingly clear the concept of one true God can be in folk religion. For example, some lines from the hymns. Yahweh is eternal. Yahweh is creator. The omnipotent is Yahweh. So all these things, they had it. It was right there. The general revelation, eternity in their hearts, it was right there. And this Muslim guy comes by, well, he's got a book, so maybe he's the one, but it's definitely not the right book. The Karen story of man's falling away from God contains stunning parallels to Genesis chapter 1. So just like I told you when I was there and I was teaching that very thing, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and original sin, they have a story that mirrors that, dramatically mirrors that right there in their Karen legend and teaching. And so all these things, all these premises are set and they're there and they're available. Could it be that Karen beliefs about Yahweh predate both Judaism and Christianity? And the answer is yes. It could be that it does. That the oral tradition has been, in societies, like I said, that village I went into, no one in that village could read. And in societies where no one can read, oral tradition is masterfully passed down. They sit around and they tell those stories and they tell those stories and they tell those stories and they become ingrained in the minds of the next generation. And it's really incredible the way it can be passed down century after century after century and maintain a lot of truth and a lot of character, because it's the only way they have to keep their history alive. It's not written, so it's the only way they have to keep it alive. During the 1830s, a Karen named Saquila gave an address before the English Governor General of Burma. He said that Europeans, the white foreigners, were originally younger brothers of the Karen people. The Karen, as older brothers, rascals that they were, negligently lost their copy of Yahweh's book. The white brothers, on the other hand, carefully preserved their copy. As a result, the white people became righteous and were known as guides to God. They also learned to sail in ships with white wings, crossing oceans. The deliverer of the Karen was to be a white foreigner and was to come across the sea from the west with white wings or sails and bring Yahweh's white book. Some versions of the tradition said the book would be gold or silver, and that's what they were talking about in the village that I was in, that it was the gold or the silver book. And actually, what happened to us there is the guy, see, this is one of the reasons, when you're on short-term mission trips, you don't have a choice, because you're probably not going to know the language or, be well-versed in it, and you're not going to be there long enough, to have any value in learning it. So you work through translators. Well, and the missionary that I was with, his main work was, a few hundred miles away from this place. He just discovered these people up here and then started trying to work with them some. Well, we found out later on that the guy that we were working with as a translator was kind of a scoundrel, and that, he was not to be trusted. Well, the hard part about that is when you're sitting there and he's translating for you and you have no clue what he's saying, then once you learn you can't trust him, and you start thinking, okay, did he always say what I said, or did he say something different? And honestly, you just have no way of knowing. But I remember that day when that man kept saying, I know this story, I know this story. The missionary almost got angry and said, tell him this is the silver book. Tell him this is the silver book. But the translator said, well, we have to be careful. And he was saying, that we were in danger, is what he was saying. We have to be careful. We have to do it slowly, is that was his answer to the missionary. But here we are, and we don't have a way to say, that this is the silver book. We have no clue how to say that in Karen. So, it was amazing, that experience. It just sticks in my head, I tell you. The Karen nation was thus poised like an 800,000 member welcoming party, ready for the first unsuspecting missionary who approached them with a Bible and a message of deliverance from God. Whoever he proved to be, he was destined to enjoy one of history's greatest privileges. Before we discover who the favored fellow was and what it took to get him on his way, let's scan the horizons of Burma and surrounding countries to see who else was waiting with bated breath for the message from the Almighty. First, he talks about the Kachin. Far north of Burma, Kachin also acknowledged their creator, Kariya Kasang. Sometimes the Kachin called him Hapanwa Nasang, the glorious one who creates, or Chawa Nachang, the one who knows. Kachin animists do not offer sacrifices to Karar Kasang, for as one Kachin put it, why should we? He never did us any harm. So in their thinking, even this God that they hold up as being, probably the God, not the only God, but the supreme one, there's no reason to do sacrifice to him because he never hurts us. We got to keep doing sacrifice to these ones that hurt us, to keep them happy and to keep them appeased. In times of extreme need, when sacrifices to the spirits have brought no relief, Kachins were known to cry out to the distant Great Spirit. And the Kachin, like the Karen, believed that Kari Kasang once gave their forefathers a book which was lost. Kachin's beliefs did not specify how the lost book would be returned to them, but apparently they were open to the possibility that it would be one day restored. Who would restore that lost book for the Kachin? And he talks about the Lahu. Southeast of Kachin and northeast of Karen, in the region where Burma squeezes between China and Thailand to touch Laos along a 100-mile border, live about 250,000 people called Lahu. Gu Sha, creator of all things, had given their forefathers his law written on rice cakes. A famine came and the fathers ate the rice cakes for their physical survival. They could not, however, obey their Creator perfectly until they regained the precise written form of His laws. Like the Karen, the Lahu people had prophets of Gashua. Their mission to keep expectation, to help the Gosha constantly alive, keep alive in their hearts that God, Gusha, of the Lahu people. The white brother will bring the lost book to our very hearts. Among the Lahu mountain of Burma, China, and Thailand, the stage for an awesome drama was set. But where were the white brothers who alone could cause the curtain on this stage to rise? Now some of this is kind of hard to figure out because, your mind, or my mind, asks questions. I think, man, and we've asked this question before. Is part of the problem somebody just should have went sooner? What took so long to get there? But then again, is part of it, God setting the stage, just like we talked about with Paul at Mars Hill. And, it was 600 years before he showed up there and used that as a platform. Now, so again, it's all speculation, but could somebody have showed up the next year and preached the very same sermon that Paul preached, about the unknown God? Or, was the timing intricate? And the same thing here. Could someone have showed up sooner? He talks about the Wa people, another 100,000 tribesmen that were headhunters. Once a year, in order to ensure their crops, the prophets of their true God, Sayeh, would do headhunting in order to appease their God. Puchan, which by the way is not even rare today. This kind of headhunting, slaughter, even cannibalism in order to appease a god is not very rare at all. And witch doctors or shamans, these individuals, of course, have their whole livelihood based upon being able to keep people deceived, just like Simon the sorcerer did in Acts chapter 8. And so, for example, in the deep jungles of Papua New Guinea now, if maybe your son gets sick and he dies, well, then you went to the witch doctor to try to get him, healed, and it doesn't work. Well, so the witch doctor's not about to let you blame him. So he tells you that the real problem is that so-and-so from this other tribe put a curse on your son, and that's why he died. It was a powerful curse, and, it couldn't be reversed. And so now what has to happen is you've got to go over there, and at least take one of his sons, maybe, just do a kind of a overall tribal massacre of all the children, or, something like that. And all this in these ideas of appeasing these spirits and trying to, reverse these negative things. And these people are living in that idea that this will work. Sayeh, the true God, Puchan said, was about to send a long-awaited white brother with a copy of the lost book. If he came close to the Wa territory and heard that the Wa were preaching evil things, he might think them unworthy of the true God and His book and turn them away again. We might not ever get another chance. So one morning, Puchan saddled a Wa pony. Sayeh told me last night that the white brother was finally come near. Sayeh will cause this pony to lead you to him. Then there's the Shan and Pulong peoples. Talking about the fifth manifestation of Buddha. And this is something that, they had gotten into, that they believe that their Messiah, and some sources claim that this was the fifth manifestation of Buddha that they were depending upon. And when they build a new home, they would always add an extra room, and that would be held in reserve for Are Mataya. Again, the name that they had for the supreme God. Just as every Jewish girl in the Old Testament times hoped that she would be the mother of Messiah, so also it seemed that every Pulong household hoped to be the one which the Buddhist Lord of Mercy would one day take shelter in, the fifth manifestation of Buddha. Then there's the Kayuu of Thailand and Burma. The Kayuu tribesmen living along the Thai-Burma border actually built houses of worship dedicated to the true God in anticipation of when the time that the messengers of God would enter such places of worship and the lost book would be in his hands to teach the people. The Lisu of China waited patiently for the white brother with the book of the true God written in the Lisu language. This is of special interest when one realizes that the Lisu language lacked even an alphabet, let alone printed material. So now think about it. They believed that the white brother would come with the book in their language, but they didn't have any other books in their language. But because of the legend that had been passed down, they believed that it would happen, that he would come with the answers in the book. The Naga, about 1 million people equipped with a clear concept of a deity that had high personal character. What would the Naga have been like if they had not lost their sacred writings? Again, they're a people of the lost book. India's Mizzou, awareness of Pantheon, the supreme God, Pa, which means father, and Theon, which has a possible interpretation of holy. Pantheon probably means Holy Father, viewed as the creator of everything. The Mizzou did offer sacrifices to Pantheon and to him alone. The Mizzou man named Darwaka had a prophetic and highly influential dream sometime during the 19th century. In the night a voice spoke to him saying, "A great light will come from the west and shine upon Mizzou land. Follow the light, for the people who bring it will be a ruling race." The prophet then said to his people, "This light may not shine in my lifetime, but when it comes, follow it, follow it." Mizzou people also possessed a tradition of a sacred book. Pantheon originally gave it to their forefathers, but they subsequently lost it. So see, here it is. People after people after people, this idea that they had the book that told them the truth, but it got lost. 10 entire peoples, all of them phenomenally equipped to understand the significance of the gospel of Jesus Christ if only they knew it existed. 10 peoples totaling more than 3 million men and women. 10 peoples concentrated within a Texas-sized part of Asia, waiting, 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 while Yahweh's people in other lands let one century after another slip by. Then at last, a new day dawned. In 1817, a devout Baptist missionary named Adoniram Judson disembarked from Rangoon, Burma, after a long sea journey from America. He had a Bible tucked under his arm, to be sure, but he possessed not the slightest inkling of the incredible significance that book held for more than 3 million people living in 800 miles of the dock where he stood. He preached the gospel to the Buddhist and the Burmese with very little response. He became discouraged, and after 7 years, he had made his first convert. After 7 years. Judson turned increasingly to the task of translating the Bible into Burmese. So with a lot of effort and very little result, he thought, I need to translate the Bible. This is something critical here. I need to translate the Bible. Well, the province arranged a rawhide, tough-caring man to come to the very household where Judson stayed. He was looking for work to help him pay a debt. Judson arranged employment for him, the man Ko Thabayu. Gradually, Judson and other members of the household introduced Bayou to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Newly recruited missionaries, a couple, George and Sarah Broadman, came on the scene. Broadman opened a school. Bayou enrolled in his school, determined to learn how to read so that the Burmese Bible that Judson was translating, he'd be able to read it. For it had already dawned on Bayou that he was the very first among his people to learn about the lost book, and that it had actually arrived in Burma. So he puts it together. This book that he's translating, that's the lost book. He believes it. And so he decides to go to school so he can be able to read the lost book and know the answers that everybody's looking for. Accordingly, he also accepted his own responsibility to proclaim the good news that virtually every Karen was waiting to hear. So when George and Sarah Broadman announced plans to launch a new mission in the city of Tavoy in the panhandle of southern Burma, Bayou said eagerly, "Take me with you." They took him, and as soon as they arrived in Tavoy, Bayou begged Broadman to baptize him. Broadman complied, and Bayou set out immediately on a journey into the hills of southern Burma. Each time he came to a Karen village, he preached the gospel. And almost every time he preached, virtually every Karen within earshot responded with wonder. Soon hundreds of Bayou's listeners came flocking down to Tavoy to see the white brother who had arrived at last with a lost book. George and Sarah could barely believe their own eyes and ears. Soon Broadman found himself besieged with invitations from Karen villages to come and supplement Bayou's ministry with more detailed teaching from the Book of Yahweh. Bayou kept on breaking new ground. The very village which 12 years earlier had received a reportedly sacred book from the Muslim traveler, Broadman went into, and he said, see if it was really a book about God or not, because they heard that this village had a book, and it was, supposedly about God, and so they needed to go in and see if it was really about God. And see, what had happened was they couldn't read the book, so they just started worshiping the book. They couldn't read it, so they just started worshiping the book, and that's the way that they were handling things. It proved to be a book of common prayers and of psalms, of an edition printed in Oxford. It's a good book, said Broadman. It teaches that there is a God in heaven, whom alone we should worship. You have been ignorantly worshiping this book. That's not good. I'll teach you to worship the God whom the book reveals. Meanwhile, Jonathan Wade, also one of Adoniram Judson's newly arrived colleagues, was being swept off his feet by another explosive and jubilant Karen response 200 miles north of Tavoy. Almost as quickly as the Karen were converted and baptized, they became missionaries to spread the good news still further among other people. Some of these Karen missionaries went to a place called Basayan, 300 miles northwest of Tavoy, and preached there. Later, when American missionaries arrived at Basayan, they found 5,000 Karen converts ready to be baptized. Karen Christians from Basayan led the way into this new cross-cultural phase by sending teams of Karen missionaries with an occasional American missionary as part of the team to the 500,000 Quechan people living in Burma, Burma's northern hump. So here we are now, and they're going, all these new believers are now going over into other countries. And I don't know how to describe it to you, but this is really what's supposed to happen. And we don't see it very much here in America. But we do see it in some of these foreign countries, where people they get saved and they realize, I've just experienced the greatest thing that anyone will ever experience. And it's my responsibility to tell other people about it. And they just push out and tell other people about it, just like it was in the first century. Also, like the Karen and Kachin response to Christianity as a fulfillment of their own beliefs about Kare Kaseng. Within the next 90 years, some 250,000 Kachin people were added to the Church of Jesus Christ. Karen, Kachin, what about the Lahu and the Way? William Marcus Young went to the Lahu people, and they pleaded with him to follow them up into the mountains. Nearly speechless with awe, Young and the Karen missionaries went with them. Tens of thousands of Lahu became Christians. In 1904, William Marcus, the Karen missionary, and Harold and Vincent baptized 2,200 Lahu converts who had learned the basics of Christian faith. From then until 1936, when he died, still in the harness among the Lahu, Young saw at least 2,000 Lahu per year enter the waters of baptism. One year, he and his sons and his Karen colleagues baptized over 4,500. 2,000 a year, that might not seem huge. You just stop and think about it. 6 or 7 a day. That's a lot. And one year, over 4,500. All because they were prepared, they were ready. They just needed someone to come with the message. It was during the initial stage of the Lahu response of the gospel that Puchan, God's advocate among the headhunters of the Wa people, saddled a little pony and told his disciples to follow it in search of the white brother bearing the book of Sai, the true God. The pony led over 200 miles of mountains and trails down into the city of Kuntang. It turned into a gate of a mission compound and headed straight for a well. The Wa tribesmen heard sounds in the well. They looked inside and saw no water, but only 2 clear blue eyes looking up at them out of a friendly bearded white face. "Hello, strangers," the voice, speaking in the Shan language, echoed out of the well. "May I help you?" William Marcus Young climbed out of the well, which was not yet in use. He was still in the process of digging it. While messengers asked, "Have you brought the book of God?" Nobody's coming and asking me that. Young nodded. The Wa men, overcame with emotion, fell at his feet and blurted out the message from Puchan. Then they added, "This pony is saddled especially for you. Our people are waiting. Fetch the book. We must be on our way." Young stared at them. "I can't leave," he replied. Thousands of Lahu came here almost daily for teaching. What shall I do? Young presented the situation to the Lahu Christians. Together, they decided to provide accommodations for the Wa men so that they would receive the teaching and make trips back to the Wa territory to teach their own people. By this means, Puchan and thousands of his people became Christians without a single visit from William Marcus Young. The Youngs soon found themselves with another 10,000 baptized Wa converts. Does anyone doubt that God could cause a pony to lead those Wa men to so unerringly over a great distance? I'm sure some do, but I'm not one. Across the border into southwestern China, an Englishman named James Oderman Fraser, working under the auspice of China Inland Missions, discovered the Lassi tribe and learned their language and began teaching the gospel among them. Encountering difficulties, he crossed the border into Burma, finally reached a Baptist outpost occupied by only Karen missionaries. He urged the Karen at the Baptist outpost to send one of their number with him for the spiritual benefit of the distant Lassi. The Karen responded positively. Fraser, upon his return, translated the Gospel of Mark. The Lussu responded in large numbers to the Gospel of Jesus Christ. Burma, southwestern China, and then eastern India. Few Christians in other parts of the world know that two entire states of predominantly Hindu India, Nagaland and Mizoram, boast a higher per capita ratio of baptized Christians than any other area of equal size anywhere in the world. Churches in Nagaland, homeland of more than 1 million Naga people, embrace 76% of the entire population within their combined members. Mizoram, for its part, counts 95% of its entire population as church members. Significantly, traditions of the lost book of God, combined with ancient predictions such as those uttered by the 17th century prophetess, played a major role in awakening the Naga and Mizo populations to the meaning of the Christian gospel. So story after story after story. Some, tremendously dramatic, like the pony going to the well. Others, just a guy with a calling on his life, showing up at the right place and trying to, follow God's will, and it was a prepared people. But the people of the lost book, and here's the interesting thing about it, again, if we were just sitting here, part of the purpose of Introduction to Missions is to excite us about missions, to get us to a place of thinking, yeah, man, that's, I really want to be a part of that, whether it be as just a great prayer warrior and a church member that does everything I can to support missions, or to go on mission trips, or to be a missionary, whatever it may be. The thing of it is, these people of the lost book still exist today. They're still out there. And they still need the missionaries to show up and give them the gospel. They still need the truth. And so it's for us to pray like Jesus asked to the Lord of harvest, that He would send forth more laborers into the field. And it's for us to consider if we should go, if we're the ones that God may be calling to go to these areas. Again, as I've said before, the need is not greater there than it is here. The need is not greater. The need is equally as great anywhere in the world that you would possibly go. That's not the problem. The problem is there's not nearly as many people trying to meet the need there as there is here. And so that's something for us to pray about. That God would send more people to these areas that don't have a good, solid gospel witness. To people that perhaps are ready, waiting with bated breath, if someone would just come and tell them the truth and give them the message. Questions? Comments? Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for these amazing stories. And Lord, I know that when we read things like this, it may affect all of us in a different way. But I think, man, how exciting. I almost wish I could have been some of those people and been in that situation where I got to bring the lost book to these people. And Lord, perhaps that's what you want for some of these here today, or someone, Lord, even in the future, that we might know and that we might be a part of their life, that they would go to some of these places. Lord, I even pray for our missionaries right now in Thailand that are working in the larger cities, that they would have the ability to stretch out and to reach out and to see new areas forged amongst these people that are people of the lost book. And I pray and ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
This book's really neat.
Hmm.
It's kind of hard to read at first.